Hello, welcome to the Wildcat Watchlist, presented by the Collegian with your hosts, Cole Bertelson
and Riley Stott.
This is our brand new podcast where we talk about all things media, whether that be TV shows, movies, video games, and it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very nerdy. Today's episode is going to be kind of unordinary in that from here on, I think we're going to have kind of general topics that cover most of the episode, but this one is going to be a mix of our introduction, recent news, and then we kind of have a short, long topic on live service games.
This is the introductory episode, getting to know us, finding out who these weirdos are. They're going to be talking to you for a while here. So what are we going to be talking about today, Riley?
Well, first of all, we want to talk about what the podcast is because it's
probably a good idea.
It's not going to be regular news. You can find all of that at KStateCollegian.com.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Absolutely shameless.
Oh, yeah, by the way, we work there, in case we haven't mentioned.
We do the new paper.
The new paper.
We work there. I do some of the pretty pictures.
Oh, do you?
I do some of them.
Yes, Riley is the graphic design chief. That's your title, right?
Yes.
And I am the copy chief. I make all of the words look pretty. That's what I do.
Yeah. So I make the drawings pretty. He makes the words pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely one of those stereotypical male moments where we met, and then within a week we were like, we should start a podcast.
We really did. I think it was our second interaction.
Pretty much.
After the interview, I just ran into you in the newsroom, and
I think we talked for about 4 hours.
We have such exciting lives that we had 4 hours just to waste in the newsroom yapping about movies and complaining, and then we were like, oh my god, you like that too? Yeah. You hate that too? Yeah. All right, let's start a podcast. So here we are. Yeah.
We're involved in the paper, obviously, but we want to talk about things that aren't going to get regular coverage in the paper.
Yes. And expand on some things that did get covered a little bit, but could go more in depth. So, Riley, what are you wanting to get out of this?
Well, I think two big things is first of all, like we just said, to cover things that don't get sufficiently covered in the paper that are kind of more niche things like movies, TV shows, games, comics, nerdy things.
Comics is a big one.
Comics is a very big one. I think it's mostly going to come into play when we talk about things that are adaptations of comics, which is a lot of them. But also, I think that there's definitely an audience here at K-State of nerdy people who want to hear and talk about nerdy things that are passionate about not traditional popular things. And so while there's plenty of outlets for the news, for music and sports, it's not really an outlet for the stuff we want to talk about. So I think part of what this is representing a portion of our student body that is nerdy, very nerdy, and wants to hear these things.
Yeah. One of our working titles for this podcast, what was it?
What, the newsroom nerds?
The newsroom nerds.
Nerd room or
and
something.
I shot that down because it makes us sound way too cool.
Yeah.
We sound way too awesome with that name. So ChatGPT found this name, which is...
Don't say that. No, they can't know that.
Well, they're going to think we're creative if we...
That's true.
Pretend that we made that up on our own.
That's fair.
Yeah. So, my goals out of this, I feel like out of the two of us, I will have the more controversial takes, which I'm fine with. I think it creates an opportunity for really interesting discussions. And even though we butt heads occasionally on some takes, we do tend to agree on a lot. And so one thing that I would like to do in the future is bring in some additional people, maybe like guest co-hosts for specific episodes where they have a lot of input and different opinions, so we can get that back and forth, because I think that's really beneficial. Just discussion in general. It's neat. It's neat to talk and have different opinions, because then you learn. You might change your opinion. You might figure out why you have that opinion. And so we're going to talk about a lot of recent stuff, whether that be, like we said, comics, shows, movie trailers, movies, video games, and how those things are doing. So let's talk about how often we'll upload and when we'll upload. I believe the plan is right now for us to upload on Fridays.
Yeah.
So that'll be after the paper has been published. So when we do have tie-ins to articles that do come out, we'll be able to like talk about them a little bit more, expand on them, and maybe even bring on people that have expertise on that.
Yeah. And we'll be able to promote it in the paper. We'll be able to have some more information in the paper if we need to. And perhaps most importantly, it'll be there at the beginning of the weekend. So as you have more time on Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, you'll be able to listen to our podcast. So
yeah, instead of hitting the Ville, you're going to be listening to our podcast.
Yeah, who needs fake patties when you have us talking about video games and movies?
Yeah. So without any further ado, let's get into recent news. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is just cover some recent things that have come out, like trailers, some movies, and then we're going to get into our main topic for today. So let's cover some trailers that have come out recently.
So we got a list here. These are, for the most part, for me, listed in the order that I am most excited about them, for the most part. I think the first one we want to talk about is Deadpool 3. I believe the first trailer that came out for it was during the Super Bowl, or that day.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever seen this before, where they had not the full trailers. So they'd have like a short clip of it promoting it, and then it'd be like, hey, go on YouTube for the full thing, which is clever because then they're like, oh, we only have to pay for...
Yes, they can pay for 15 seconds as opposed to a minute. Or
yeah.
I think that's become a little more common recently, from like the last few years especially. And I feel like I see the after effects of it on YouTube now, where it's like there's a short 3 to 5 second trailer for the trailer to try and get you to not skip the trailer on YouTube. And I feel like that's in the same vein. It's the same sort of, please give us more of your attention, even though you don't have to, kind of appeal.
So yeah, the Deadpool 3 trailer was probably the biggest one. I'm cautiously optimistic for this. I'm usually pretty critical of recent Marvel stuff that has come out, but what do you think about the first 2 Deadpool movies? I thought the first one was quite good.
Yeah.
Second one had a lot of good things about it.
Yes.
And having Deadpool and Wolverine on screen at the same time is going to be quite the experience. I think it's going to be neat to see.
That's what I'm really excited about is, yeah, the second one I don't think was as good. I think there were some good character moments that I think provide more in Deadpool than the first movie did. But I think obviously the big appeal, it's literally the name. It's because it's not officially Deadpool 3. It's Deadpool and Wolverine, or Wolverine and Deadpool, whichever one it is.
Right.
And I think that it's a pretty big clue into how big of a part of the movie Hugh Jackman's going to be. But I think that's the big appeal for me, especially. I'm really excited about that. And yeah, I am kind of hesitant to be like, oh, yay, Marvel. But it seems like...
It definitely has a different vibe, I think. And the reason I said I'm cautiously optimistic about it is because it does have those elements of time travel and like universe hopping and things like that have been really dominant in Marvel lately. And it showed up at the end of Deadpool 2, where he, like, spoilers, like, undid a lot of the things that happened in the movie. So I think there's a balance, there's a give and take for that, because on the one hand, it can provide lots of neat character moments and things like that. Like, obviously having Wolverine and Deadpool together and messing around at the Marvel Cinematic Universe could be really neat. But also, if you get too crazy with it and go completely off the rails, it might make the story pretty hard to follow and pretty nonsensical.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. This could be its own episode, really talking about multiversal comic book content, right?
And it probably will be later down the line, so stay tuned. But
with the amount of content
on the topic of Deadpool and Wolverine and X-Men, the X-Men 97 show is gonna come out soon, and it's gonna be like reprising this old show. How do you feel about that? Like, banking on that nostalgia?
Well, I'm fairly interested. The show, the original show, the X-Men, the animated series, kind of came to an unceremonious end, and like the last season had a pretty serious dip in quality, especially from where it started, which was kind of what helped kick off Mutant Mania in the 90s. And I'm pretty interested to see how it goes. I was not, obviously I wasn't alive when it came out, so I'm not like a diehard fan of the show, but
it is very nostalgic. It's very iconic. I think it'll be interesting to see how successful it is, because if this goes crazy and like everyone's loving it, we might see a resurgence of that old like 90s aesthetic and a lot more stuff.
Yeah. I'm very interested. I know there's been some discourse online about the quality of the animation, but it's not quite comparing. Like they've compared not real animation cells to actual the animation, the actual screenshots of animation from the new show. It's not quite a fair comparison.
I think we'll have to wait and see once it comes out to fully be able to compare it. But I have seen, like if you go on social media, you'll see those images comparing different like characters and things like that in their appearance, and it's slightly different.
Yeah.
I will usually be on the side of let's not change things. If it was good the first time, don't mess with it. But, with things getting modernized and things like that, it's an opportunity for it to get better or for it to get worse. So we'll have to see. But moving on to a big shift in content, we have the Roadhouse trailer. And I don't think you've seen this, but it's Roadhouse. So it's a remake of the original Roadhouse movie. And I saw the trailer for this, and it just instantly got me hooked on the idea of watching it because it's Conor McGregor as the bad guy. And I feel like they just took Conor McGregor, put him on set, and said, hey, be yourself. And it looks hilarious and action-packed and exciting, and Jake Gyllenhaal will be the main character in it. It looks like it's going to be a fun time. Like, obviously, we'll have to see how good the story is and things like that, but just an unhinged Conor McGregor speeding around on motorcycles and beating the crap out of people, I think will be entertaining to watch. So
that sounds very fun. I don't know anything about it. I think I've heard of the original, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
It's so the story is a guy, he's an old fighter, kind of past his heyday, and this old roadhouse is being harassed by a bunch of goons, a bunch of hooligans, and so they, the owner, I believe, like reaches out to him and is like, hey, we need your help. We need you to like basically be a bouncer, keep guys out of there that are causing trouble. Yeah. And so he does that, and then the bad guy, or like the group of bad guys, which will be mainly Conor McGregor and a bunch of other guys, are just, for whatever reason, causing absolute chaos. So we'll see how well that does. And up next we have Twisters.
Yeah, I don't know much about it. I'm not going to lie.
Yet another remake of a older.
I think this is just a sequel, from what I can tell, especially with.
Well, I don't even know if it's that actually, because based on what's the main star's name?
Oh man, it's that one guy.
He was in Maverick.
Guy. Yeah. I know.
Glenn Powell.
I think that's right.
Yeah. He, from his remarks in interviews, it sounds like it's not even a sequel. It's just using the same name in a vaguely similar story, but it's not. I think he said it's not a direct sequel. It's not a remake. It's just kind of its own name, which at that point, it's like, why even use the same name?
Sounds vaguely of Ghostbusters 2016.
Oh,
otherwise known as Ghostbusters Answer the Call.
Don't bring up that movie.
I was kind of hoping it would be. Not that I'm a massive fan of Twister. I mean, I like Twister, but it's not quite like a.
We're in the Midwest. We have to love.
Yes,
movies about tornadoes and twisters.
Culturally significant Midwestern film.
Yes, it is our culture.
I thought it was a sequel because it kind of has that Alien to Aliens name scheme.
Yeah.
So I guess that's
Twisters.
Twisters now, even more of them. No one can hear.
They're back, and there's more. No one can hear you scream of the tornado. Well, yeah, it's pretty loud with all the wind. So yeah, we'll see how that does. And then Ghostbusters, a new Ghostbusters. So this one will be the sequel to the, what year did that other one come out?
I want to say it was 21, maybe 22.
Probably.
It's been a couple years now.
I quite liked the first one. I thought it was really respectful. You brought up Ghostbusters 2016 already.
Yeah.
Which was awful.
Disrespectful, in fact.
Yeah, it was not great.
No.
Didn't you love how they brought back Bill Murray only to throw him out of a window and say he's not Ghostbusters material?
Yes.
You could, because apparently he did not want to do that movie, and they pulled contract on him and forced him to be in it. And you can just tell. You can just tell from his performance. He's always sitting down. He's always got this blank, grumpy look on his face. He's not enjoying himself, and then they just throw him out of a window.
Yeah, I have watched it. I have watched the movie.
Oh, I'm
2016.
sorry.
That could almost be also it's another whole episode.
I watched that thing in theaters.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was, and that was before I got super critical about movies, but I remember walking out of the theater with my dad, who I watched it with, and we often do this. We're like, oh, what'd you think about the movie? And we were just silent. We just walked out and we were like, I turned to him as we leave the building and I'm like, what'd you think of that? And he was like, I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of it. And I was like, yeah.
In my opinion, for the type of film
In your
that is, of the group of stars that is, that I want to say most of them are from SNL, like modern SNL, I think.
So the peak of comedy.
Sure. Something like that. But like, there are other movies that are like that. An example that comes to mind.
You mean there's other bad movies?
Sure. Well, there's that group has movies.
That group.
That group of women has movies, have movies, and one that comes to mind is like Spy.
I've not seen that. Heard of it.
I think my grandparents watched it and I was in the room. But it is, when it comes to that kind of movie and that kind of comedy, it seems okay in that vein. But
I wouldn't even go that far.
As a Ghostbusters movie, just a movie, and as a Ghostbusters movie, it is disrespectful and it is not enjoyable to sit and watch, especially if you're coming in as potentially a lifelong Ghostbusters fan.
Yes.
Which is kind of a big thing. It is not that. It is not respectful to the type of humor, to the universe, to...
It is definitely a big shift in tone and vibe of the original ones, which are really... Definitely recommend going back and watching those. Yeah. They're fantastic. They hold up really well. The comedy is timeless. It's so good. It's great. And what was really great about it was really reserved, because if you compare the first Ghostbusters to 2016, how they start, the first when they're in the library and they first see a ghost, it's a terrifying experience, and it's not. They don't really even show much. Yeah, a lot of practical effects. A lot of the performance carries it. Like the actors are genuinely terrified, which is a great tonal shift, because up to that it's very chill and fun, and so that's great. And then you compare that to 2016, where it's just full on. There's this giant CGI, garishly colored, horribly oversaturated ghost just there, and they're not freaking out. They're like, oh my god, it's so beautiful, it's great. And then hilarious CGI goo everywhere. Goo.
Yes,
they get covered in goo.
I love that.
It's like what is it? Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards. If it was a movie, Awards. Yeah. It's just, what if we just covered everything in slime?
Yeah. No, not a great movie. It's just bad.
If we keep going on like this, the entire episode will be trashing Ghostbusters 2016. Yeah. But to the new movie, the one, what'd you say, 21, 22?
Yeah,
is when it came out. Yeah, it really did a good job of respecting the original characters. Obviously, the actor for Egon passed away, and I really love how they incorporated his kids into the story. Yeah, it kind of has like Stranger Things vibes. Yes. One of the actors obviously is from Stranger Things, and you can really tell it was the idea for that movie came when the popularity for that was really at its height. Yeah. But I think it fits really well, because obviously the original Ghostbusters that are still around are going to be in it. They were in the other one for a little bit, and they have some pretty good comedic actors like Paul Rudd in it as well, which he's pretty great in most things. I really like him.
Also, I guess maybe not from Kansas. I think he's from Kansas City. I don't remember whether he's from the Kansas or Missouri side, but yeah.
We'll take credit for him anyway.
Yes, he's definitely from Kansas. I think he went to Blue Valley, if I remember, so I think he's from Kansas. Okay. But yeah, I really like the look of it, what it is, because my favorite Ghostbusters stories are when the Ghostbusters are just kind of at their peak. It's not the beginning or the end of the Ghostbusters like Ghostbusters 1 and 2 are, because the first movie is establishing who the Ghostbusters are. It has to do a lot of the legwork to set it up. Ghostbusters 2 has a lot of them coming together. But some of my favorite Ghostbusters content is actually the real Ghostbusters cartoon, which is so good, and the music from it is amazing. But it's just them busting ghosts. It's not some massive event that is bringing them together or bringing them together again.
It's just them on a normal day on the job. And
Yes.
It's really fun. And so I like that they're going back to the city in this one as opposed to like the country. So I think that's going to create a lot more story opportunity to like bring back the vibes of those original movies. And obviously the whole point of the villain is like fear is what's fueling it seems like.
Yeah.
So that'll be really fun to watch. It seems like just a classic story with a classic villain
Yes.
for them to have to deal with. So that'll be pretty good. And then moving on to recent movies,
Yes.
we have an absolute banger. The movie of the year, Madam Web.
Yeah.
Morbius 2.
I think we're gonna.
It's Webbin time.
I do think we're gonna make an attempt to go out and watch that.
Yeah, we're gonna try and watch it this weekend. Next episode will probably be a deep dive into that. And if you can't tell, I'm being incredibly sarcastic when I say it's great. It is famously bashed already.
Yes. I've heard terrible things. I can't speak too much of it because I haven't seen it. I mean, I trust the general consensus that it's bad.
It does seem to have that vibe of like early 2000s. It's true of a lot of Sony superhero movies, where it has that vibe of early 2000s superhero movies that aren't always great, but at least are experimental. They're trying something unique, and they at least recognize that characters need to have like a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
It was pretty deceptive, it seems like, the advertising for that movie, considering. So there's Madam Web, and then there's 3 Spider-Women that are shown pretty prominently in the trailers, and from what I've heard, they're only in their superhero personas for about a grand total of 2 minutes, and it's in like a future flash, like premonition of what may happen sometime later, possibly. So they don't actually become superheroes in the movie, and it seems like it's just a bunch of normal people wandering around running from a knockoff Spider-Man.
Yes.
The edgy Spider-Man that just...
Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have high hopes, and it seems like that was warranted.
Yeah.
I have watched some of Morbius. I fell asleep. But it's bad. Very bad.
The only times that I've seen parts of that movie are by accident. At one point, when it was at its peak of just everyone was laughing at it. Yeah. People would just like put it on in Twitch streams and then just laugh at it. So I tuned into one of those and I saw the part that's really clipped a lot where the villain is just having a dance session.
Yes.
Just jamming out.
Yes.
Like goofy vampire just dancing, and
yeah,
that movie was just a fever dream. That probably will come up a lot in the next episode too. We might actually have to watch Morbius.
That might be fun
to compare it to Madam Web and find out which one's actually better.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah, and then I'm sure we're going to come back around whenever Kraven the Hunter comes out, and we'll do the same thing all over again.
I really like Kraven as a character. This will come in more in really comic-heavy discussions that we have. Spider-Man characters especially are just so rich in character and backstory and stuff. And so I get really nervous and I get really worried when they are like, let's completely change the character.
Yeah, and let's do it all without Spider-Man because Disney and Sony don't get along.
No, they don't. Anyway, moving on to a bit of a higher note, and by a bit I mean drastically higher. We have Dune 2. That just came out yesterday as of the time of recording, February 25th. Excited to watch that too. We should maybe we'll do a double feature and watch that at the theater too. Really liked the first one.
Yeah.
It was slower paced. I haven't read the book.
Same. Yeah.
And what I've heard, there was going to be more departures from the book in Dune 2 than there were in Dune 1. But you will get a lot of that. I mean, even in the best adaptations, I mean, my favorite films of all time is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and there are pretty big departures, not drastic, but like there are, some characters aren't included, and you get that with condensing these huge stories into, even when they're really long movies, condensing really big stories into something that can fit on the screen. Mm-hmm. And so you can judge things as an adaptation, and you can also just judge them on their own as a film and determine the quality that way. And so I think that's what we'll be doing. But I really liked it. I think the actors were fantastic in the first one.
Yeah, I think that was a bit of a highlight, was the production quality and the performances. My biggest problem was the pacing, because I just going in, I didn't do any research, so I didn't know that it was going to be split up into multiple films. I wasn't surprised given the depth of the Dune stories, which I kind of already knew, so I wasn't surprised by that. But I came out kind of like, well, where's the rest? But it's been a while, and I feel like the way to consume them is back to back, and I think it's difficult to kind of judge one without the other.
Yeah, I was hesitant to judge Dune 1 without having the full story. I feel the same way about Spider-Verse. Like, I want to wait to see. The first one I loved on its own, but the second one is very much the first half of an incomplete story.
Yes.
So I don't want to really talk about it a ton until I see that last half, so I can really judge how the setups are paid off and things like that. But yeah, the production quality, you mentioned, that was really good. And I think Star Wars does this really well, especially in the original trilogy, of setting up a world where you can believe that this is real people in it doing things, like living their lives. So you know that there are other stories happening outside of our main characters. Like, this is a complete world. And I think Dune did a decent job of that. I mean, there was a lot of exposition, like setting up, like, this is the different kingdoms of all of this, and like all of the politics and spice trading and all of these things. And I do have more of a bias toward long form content. I really do like overarching, like, long form stories. So I wasn't that dissuaded by the really long runtime and the more, like, spaced out storytelling. But I do agree, like, it is definitely, if you have a shorter attention span or just want to watch a more traditional movie, Dune might not be for you, because it is slow.
Yeah, it would have made a killer HBO series. I mean, you could break down what's there into a fantastic show.
That's true for a lot of movies. Because the great benefit of shows, and they haven't really been capitalized on as well lately, is like, the benefit of shows is that you can have more time to go further into the story and further into the characters, especially. Like, you can get to know characters and be with them for multiple seasons, as opposed to just like 2 hours or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And so you can really expand on those stories and have really complicated relationships. But now, because, the average show used to be like 20 something episodes.
Yeah.
And now it's like, you're lucky to get more than 10.
Yeah.
Like,
It's kind of, it's either a limited series or it's a serialized, a longer form story.
Because what you get now is like 6 or 8 episodes. And even then, and they're like 30 to 45 minutes. And even then, half of it really feels like padding. Like, you could have cut so much of this out, and it could have just been an hour and a half movie. Like, a lot of the time I feel like there's a mandate for shows just to have more content without really having a firm story in mind. And so they kind of just have to pad around time.
Yes. Well, that's. I think that's where we're going to conclude our coverage of recent news here at about the 30-minute mark here. We've got a bigger topic for the rest of the episode, though. And it's kind of inspired by an article Cole here wrote in the most recent issue of the Collegian. So how about you kind of introduce us here to what we're talking about?
Yeah, so 2 video games came out very close to each other, and they are really interesting in the way you can compare them, because they're at the same time extremely similar and extremely dissimilar. So Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League came out. Yeah, you already laughed. And then Helldivers 2 also came out right around the same time. So they're both about a month old, I want to say.
Give or take, yeah. Suicide Squad launched at the beginning of this month, and I think, I guess I can kind of look at the chart here. It looks like Helldivers launched maybe a week later. Still within the last
around
month.
the 9th. So yeah, they're less than a month old. Similarities, they're both live service games online. So you get on, you can have up to a team of 4 in both,
Yes.
fighting alien enemies, to be very broad.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the similarities end. So Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, I'm going to just call it Suicide Squad for the rest of this because it's a mouthful. It's a story game, but it's live service, so you can't play it unless you have a constant internet connection.
Yeah.
And a complaint that has come up a lot is that if your internet is broken up for even a second, it will not just like pause the game, it'll kick you out, and there's loadouts in the game, and a lot of the times those will get wiped. Apparently some of your progress will get set back, and it's just really annoying to just get kicked out of the game. And then in Helldivers 2, the point of that game is it's very straightforward. It's teams of up to 4. You can land on planets. You have a variety of weapons. You just shoot at constant hordes of either alien bugs or alien robots, and it's just very straightforward. And that's kind of the appeal of it, is that it's just a fun game, simple game done really well. And so yeah, Suicide Squad, it's you play as either Harley Quinn, King Shark,
Captain Boomerang.
Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot. I mix up Deadshot and Bullseye a lot. Different universes, but so they have this mission to kill the Justice League because this evil jerk Brainiac, this mean alien villain, he's taken over the minds of this Justice League, and the only solution is to kill them. And it can work. I'm not going to say the idea can't work, but you have to be very careful when approaching that, because the Justice League is a very beloved group, and they kind of shot themselves in the foot even more by setting it in the Arkham Batman universe. So they're bringing back this IP that already had a pretty satisfying end, I want to say. And this is really beloved character. I mean, those games are really popular, and not having a very respectful send-off, especially for Batman, which is especially ill-timed. I mean, they couldn't have known that this was going to happen, but the voice actor has passed away for Batman, and so one of the last things, because I think there's one other thing that he's going to have appeared in,
I think it's
one of the DC animated movies.
The Crisis on Infinite Earths, whichever.
Part 2.
It's either part 2 or I think there's 3 parts, so it will show up eventually, from what I understand.
But yes, he is yelled at by Harley Quinn for a while and lectured and then shot in the head on a bench, and it's really disappointing and really disrespectful to fans of that series, and also just the character in general. And people were not happy about that. People were not happy about that at all. And we'll get into the numbers here in a second, but that game is not doing well, to put it mildly. And it's actually, I find it hilarious. I covered this in my article a bit. This has unintentionally skyrocketed the popularity of the original games by a huge amount. The player count for Arkham Knight and Arkham City, I think, have increased a ton. And on the flip side of it, Helldivers is doing insanely well. They're suffering from success, actually, because the only criticism I've heard of the game, really, I think you've heard of a couple of like minor quality like bugs and things like that, which is to be expected with a new game. But the only big criticism I've heard is that the servers are just so overwhelmed constantly that some people just can't get into the game because so many people are playing it, because people just love it that much. But yeah, you seem to be pulling up some numbers here.
So we're going to kind of go through a bit of this here, but I kind of want to break down the overall reception of each game. Starting with Suicide Squad, we have an overall Metacritic score from critics and reviewers of 60 out of 100, which I think is kind of weird, because
it's very high.
It's
very high.
strangely high, and for game journalists, it's probably not all that high, really. I'm trying to think.
Game journalists tend to be very different in how they judge
Yes.
the quality of games than the average video game player does.
Probably because they want to still receive a free copy of whatever next game comes out from that same publisher. But the users on Metacritic have it sitting at a 3.7 out of 10, which is it's a pretty stark difference.
Honestly, I'd say that even is too high.
I mean,
it is not a good game. Okay, so aside from the story and how that is not great, the characters are extremely unlikable. It's really painful. Yeah. I don't have a next-gen console or a PC, so I was not able to play these games myself, but I sat down and I watched full playthroughs of Suicide Squad, and I watched multiple hours of Helldivers content, and it is hard to listen to the characters in Suicide Squad constantly in your ear. Really painful dialogue. It's some of the most cringy things I've heard in a while. Mm-hmm. It gets grating, and then add on to that the gameplay itself is really simplistic, not in a good way. The fights are very boring and straightforward. The mechanics aren't incredibly well implemented. You've probably seen pictures before of like the most crowded video game screen imaginable.
Yes.
And that really summarizes this game really well. There's indicators, hints, status updates, objectives, all of these different things, and it's all just vomited on the screen at once, and it's
yeah. I did not play this game. I'm in the same boat in that I just watched it. I do have a PC that could play it, but I refuse. It's kind of on principle. I don't want to.
In case you're wanting an endorsement or a review of this, do not buy this game. It's a waste of money.
Yeah, there's enough review content out there that you can get a good idea of what it is. If you are into looter shooters, do your research before you get into it. It is, as far as I can tell, given the reviews that I've watched, not even a great looter shooter, in that it's even worse than something like Destiny or even like Marvel's Avengers, which got shut down, I want to say last year.
And that brings up something that when a game gets shut down, like, so this game is still full price, right? So around $60.
So,
and it's a live service game, so you can't play this unless it's still being maintained. And so the second, which seems like it'll be pretty soon, that the game stops being updated and maintained and run, you just don't have a game anymore. And I think that's especially odd for a story game. I get that you wanted it to be multiplayer and all of that, but it's not a great plan to set it up in that way.
I can kind of speak to that from a completely different game. One of my favorite game franchises, Titanfall. The first game was always online in that you couldn't really experience the story because the story was broken down into multiplayer matches that had scripted audio content and some big events happened in the game, in some of the matches to some extent, that showed the story of the game. And so you could not experience the story of the game unless you were in a multiplayer match. That has kind of backfired. And it was kind of a bigger issue a couple years ago, but there was some pretty serious hacking that happened to the servers, widespread hacking, that kind of shut the game down for a long time. Same with Titanfall 2. But that was the case for a while, and even now there's pretty much no players. Even with servers fixed, there's pretty much no players. And so it is kind of a dated game, but it's been that way for the past several years. But you cannot go and enjoy the story of that game for yourself at this point. You'd have to go and watch some video content to figure out the story. And I think Suicide Squad is going to suffer a very similar fate, but I don't think that the game's servers are going to be maintained for, I think 9 years is how long Titanfall 1 has been up. I doubt Suicide Squad is going to last that long. I think it's going to be in a similar boat as Marvel's Avengers, and that it's probably going to be shut down within the next 2 or 3 years.
It may not even last that long. This is a drastic drop.
I feel like they're probably contractually obligated to maintain the servers for a certain extent, and I'm sure it's not going to last any longer.
I've seen a lot of people saying, man, I wish we could just give the Suicide Squad servers to Helldivers so that people can actually play the game they want to play. But yeah, the point about the story is interesting because even now you cannot play the entire story of this game because this ends with you beating the first Brainiac. And notice I say first Brainiac because there are 12 other Brainiacs. It's like a multiverse thing. So you're going to have to come back. If you want to play the story of this game, you're going to have to come back for the next 12 seasons because this is in like a season format and do it all over again each time, fighting a different character or a different version of the same character. And I'm sure more of the same villains and
the same gameplay. I'm sure like the same kind of combat.
Basically, you're gonna have to play the same game 13 times in order to actually say you completed the game.
Yes, and another concern of mine beyond free content, which from what I can tell, that's all going to be free. I hope. A concern of mine is that the microtransactions are pretty egregious. Like the skin pack, or the cosmetic packs, are even kind of worse than Call of Duty prices.
Yeah, it's a constant plague on games lately. Just absolutely. A barrage of microtransactions, all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty egregious. I know there were some instances of even like the free cosmetic packs that came with the base or with like the upgraded version of the game weren't even the full cosmetic packs, and you still had to spend, I want to say, another $20 to get the full pack. But overall, it's kind of strange to me because I think it's kind of worth mentioning that the Steam reviews are actually surprisingly mostly positive, sitting at 79% of the 4,310 reviews being positive. But all the reviews that I could scroll through seem to fit into, I think, 3 categories. Either they're flat out negative and have very genuine concerns and rated with a thumbs down, or they're positive but willing to admit serious flaws. And these are people that are more into these kind of games, and they're pretty willing to admit that they're not for everyone.
The majority of people that do leave comments will obviously be very passionate one way or the other. So you're either going to get the people that really hate the game or really love the game when you see the majority of comments. Yeah,
and I think the last group are negative reviews, but they're purely memeing. And they're definitely not serious reviews.
Which does reflect a dislike of the game, but it is not genuine criticism.
Yes. And another kind of tell of this kind of game...
This one is really big.
Yes. The player counts have been incredibly low, even from the start. And these are Steam numbers. They are not telling of console numbers, which are likely a little higher. That's just kind of how things go. But on Steam, at the very least, the player counts for the last couple weeks have been pretty much always less than 1,000.
That is huge.
Yeah, the 24-hour peak at this time of recording is 940 players. And that's not great. The all-time peak was 13,459, which is not terrible. It's almost nothing compared to Helldivers 2.
You don't want that to be your peak.
No.
And under 1,000 players pretty consistently for like the past week at least.
Yeah.
Well, it looks even more than that.
I was going to say, the next thing I want to talk about is the Arkham Knight player counts, which obviously isn't the whole Arkham trilogy, just the most recent entry before this one.
Yes, this game drove people away from it in favor of replaying something from 10 years ago that is much better.
Yeah, the game had... I don't want to say somewhat of a resurgence because its all-time peak is 27,406 players, over twice as much as Suicide Squad, and that was almost a decade ago. But it did have one of its highest player counts since it launched, at about 6,713, which I do believe, based on this chart, is the second or third highest point since launch. And there's a pretty significant jump in February of 2024 here. With a 24-hour peak as of today at 6,551 players, which is
a hefty difference.
Yes, thousands of more players have played it in the last 24 hours than Suicide Squad.
I know I'm one of those players.
Same.
Yeah, you're one of those players too.
Absolutely. No.
Definitely enjoying it much more.
Yeah. I'm replaying it again. I've played it probably 3 or 4 times, and this is the game's not perfect. It has flaws, but the gameplay is so much more enjoyable, and I'm sure we're going to do more content on the Arkham trilogy. I think we have an idea to do it here sometime soon, to do kind of a retrospective on the whole trilogy from Rocksteady, maybe even Arkham Origins. We'll see.
Yeah, but just putting a final cherry on the top of this, or rather lid on the coffin of this game, is a Warner Brothers exec, specifically, how do you say that name?
Chief Financial Officer.
No,
you mean the actual name? Gunnar Wiedenfels, I believe.
He stated that Suicide Squad has fallen short of our expectations. He's been quoted as saying that, and that is the absolute opposite of what you want to hear. Again, This is less than a month after this thing has come out. It is already limping on its last leg. It's dying quickly.
Which is in stark contrast to Helldivers 2, which has been a critical success alongside a commercial success.
It's really becoming like a phenomenon.
I didn't really know about it when it launched, but then I started seeing it more in my Instagram feed. It just started showing up more and more, and I'm determined to go and buy it this weekend once I get paid.
Please give us a raise so we can waste it on video games.
Yes, dear CMG, please give us a raise. To compare numbers here, Metacritic scores on Helldivers 2 from critics have it at an 82 out of 100, and users have it at an 8.4 out of 10, which is a pretty stark contrast. Steam reviews on this are also mostly positive. It is probably worth mentioning that as of about a week ago, that was kind of mixed. It seemed like there were slightly more server issues, but given the game's new peak, I think they've invested a little bit in it recently. But the negative reviews on the game do focus on stuff like that. Servers are very full all the time, and therefore people aren't able to connect.
Very long wait times. Sometimes they get kicked out.
Yeah. There are some issues with the anti-cheat. It is historically a difficult and potentially insecure software. I've seen some reviews that basically call it malware. I can't speak to much of that in Helldivers 2. It was purely speculative and kind of based on its track record, but it doesn't seem like there's any current issues. And then last thing is somewhat related to the first issue, in that there's quite a bit of crashes and bugs. Some people blame it on the anti-cheat, some on the servers. It's probably a bit of both. And at least the ones that show up in the reviews, which, like we said, are usually either passionate for or against, are usually focused on pretty large bugs that prevent people from playing the game as a whole.
Another thing to consider is on the gameplay side, this game does have friendly fire always on. You cannot turn it off. And it's part of the fun of it, but occasionally you'll get trolls that'll just come in and absolutely wipe out all of their teammates, and not fun. But people that do that, and then I've seen videos of people of recordings of that happening, and it's like, all right, you have a bounty on your head now. That player now has the entirety of the community actively hunting them. So it's not the majority for sure. Yeah,
and I think it makes great use of the always online and live service mechanics. It does have microtransactions, which is worth mentioning.
They seem to be minor, though. It seems mostly cosmetic. So each of the different suits have a perk, and it's not huge. It's like one can carry one more stem, healing. Another can the basic one that you get at the start of the game, I think the number is, it gives you a 50% chance of surviving a lethal hit. So little stuff that can be really beneficial. I mean, if you want one of those healings, it'll really benefit you. But I've seen, from what I've watched, it is entirely possible to get the majority of that content without spending any money, just by earning credits in the game.
I've seen that there's obviously, like many other games, especially live service games, there's a battle pass type thing. But there's normal, a free one and a paid one. And it seems like the free one, from the reviews that I've seen, is very generous and is more lined up with traditional game progression, and that it's being pretty generous, and you're unlocking guns and armor. And from what I've seen, the microtransactions are fairly cheap. I want to say most of them are sub $10, I think, even like the pretty major cosmetic ones, I believe. And the game also is $40 as opposed to the $70 that Suicide Squad is. And obviously is it has a way better reception from people at this point. And I think people are far more likely to contribute to a game that they enjoy in small doses like that, as opposed to the $20-$25 for one cosmetic.
This is definitely a game that you can just sit down with your buddies after a long day and then just have a fun time doing quick missions, just mowing down enemies, and it's just a very point and shoot. But that almost oversimplifies it, because there is a lot of fun little details and there's a lot of room for skill growth in it. But it is you're not at a disadvantage too bad by not getting into all of the microtransactions and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas with Suicide Squad, it's this big story that you have to trudge through, and it's just overall not a fun experience.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning some of the specific criticisms we had of Suicide Squad, especially like the dialogue. The dialogue in Helldivers is very fun. It's campy. It's very extremely patriotic.
It's very goofy, and it's very over the top, and that's what's fun. I believe the voice actor is the same one that voiced Spider-Man in the PS4 games.
Yuri Lowenthal?
Yeah, and it's just you'd be mowing down bugs for like 5 minutes, and then your character just screams democracy. It's unhinged in a really great way. And then contrast that to Suicide Squad, where apparently the Captain Boomerang voice actor is actually Australian. And he
is?
Yeah. So I'm gonna blame this on the direction, but it is the most obnoxious, grating, fakest Australian accent. He's like, "Oh, you're all right, mate." It's painful. Keep in mind, you're playing as these characters for very long periods of time.
Yeah.
And hearing that screeching in your ear and also just the jokes do not land at all. No. It's very joke heavy, and it doesn't pull it off well.
No. I think it's also worth comparing player numbers, especially since we talked about how bad Suicide Squad is doing. It's definitely worth mentioning how great Helldivers is doing. The current 24-hour peak for this game is 458,046 players at the time of recording, with the all-time peak for the game's lifespan being just above that at 458,709.
It is still very near its peak. This thing has not slowed down at all. It is in huge demand. People are clamoring to get in this game.
Yeah, it peaked just over the weekend too. So as we're recording this game is still at the top of its game, and it exploded over the last several weeks. And the game even started significantly above where Suicide Squad started. It just keeps going, and it's just dwarfing anything that Suicide Squad is putting out there, and it's on an upward trend, which is more than we can say for Suicide Squad. It is doing significantly better. Even just ignoring the numbers proportionately, it is doing way better.
I'm just giddy with excitement waiting for you to scroll to the graph.
We could talk about this real fast. So
you showed me this not too long ago, and so for our audio listeners, this is the most comedically different, like, contrasting graph that you've ever seen in your life. Imagine, so you have your X and Y axis. At the very bottom, there is this funny little blue line, and at first I thought, why are you showing me a graph of only Helldivers' success? There's a tiny little blue line right at zero, like just above zero, that is completely straight with one slight little bump. Y'all are from Kansas. Most of you are from Kansas. If you've seen Mount Sunflower, the completely flat, if you Google Mount Sunflower, just a flat plane with a slight little bump, and it's the highest point of Kansas. That is what this line looks like. There's a slight little hump at the very beginning, and then it's just a complete straight line that I mistook for just the bottom of the graph. and then you have right next to it Mount Everest, just skyrocketing to the very top of the graph.
Yeah. The graph here is from Steam, or I guess from SteamDB, a tool that you can use to find player counts, compare player counts, and I used their tool to compare the player counts of both over the last month, and it's a pretty big difference. Helldivers started significantly higher than Suicide Squad did. It even launched about a week after, and it looks like dozens of thousands of players higher than Suicide Squad did, and it is way outperforming Suicide Squad. So much so that the developers have committed to hiring on more developers at the company to support their growth and more content. Their CEO, Johan Pilestedt, I apologize, I'm a little old Kansas boy, I don't know how to pronounce things.
Billy Steadit.
Yeah, something like that.
That's definitely worse.
I apologize. I love your game, I'm sorry.
Please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he wrote on Twitter even 2 weeks ago, long before it even hit its newest peak, that they were committing to hire on more developers, which it does sound like they need to support their server infrastructure, which I'm sure they'll get on pretty fast given the game's growth. But I think these two are a great comparison. Right now, we've had plenty of live service games and always online games. I mean,
yeah, they're both always online, third-person shooters.
Yes.
Well, similar idea for combat, like shooting at alien enemies just running at you, or just standing there. In the case of Suicide Squad, often.
I don't have an inherent problem with live service and always online games. They've been around for decades. I mean, we have as far back as like World of Warcraft. We have online games that are purely for online play and that have recurring updates to provide new, usually substantial content. I think we're kind of at a point where what was traditionally in MMO games has kind of bled elsewhere. You know, I grew up playing like Wizards 101 and Pilots 101. I mean, I've played some MMOs. I played DC Universe Online, which is not a great game. But even the updates for that were pretty significant. And you came in and you knew what you were getting into. It was an online MMO. These games are not. These are shooters, both of them, third-person shooters that are Suicide Squad's more story-driven. It is worth mentioning, I was going to mention it earlier, but I forgot. Helldivers 2 does have a large-scale conflict, and that all players that play the game contribute by mission. So if your mission succeeds, it builds toward the greater conflict. I'd say that's
the developers said that they are leaving the story entirely up to the players to just kind of make up. Well, because you're creating the story as you play, because each time you land on a planet, there's a little icon at the top saying, all right, how much you've liberated the planet. I like that term. You've liberated it of all of its inhabitants. And so it'll be like a progress bar, and the more you die and fail on the planet, the lower that'll go. And I believe like once you get to 100, it'll be...
Yeah, then you like move on to the next planet, and then you clear a sector, and then you move on to the next sector, and then...
just a continuous progression across the universe, basically.
On different fronts of a galaxy or whatever.
What was really interesting to me, I also forgot to mention this earlier, is that Helldivers 1, like, I never heard of this game. It didn't seem to have, like, obviously there were some people that really loved it, but it wasn't anywhere near as culturally significant as this one seems to be. Yes. And again, comparing that to Suicide Squad, where all of these built-in fans of not only just Justice League in general, but Arkham Batman, Suicide Squad fans, all of this stuff, you were starting at a higher spot on the hill, and all you needed to do was just start there and keep climbing up, and they instead just tumble down the hill.
Yeah. The hill of their declining player base, if you will.
Yeah. Well, the complete flat line.
Yes. If you look at their player count on its own, without comparison, without
comparing it to literally any other game.
Yeah. It's still a significant drop And when you consider just the game itself, but compared to anything else, it's almost nothing. But
You would have, on paper, you would have expected this game to do much better than the Helldivers 2.
yeah, yeah. It's driven by a well-known property from developers that have some clout in the space that made groundbreaking and influential games. But then they went and made a Sunset Overdrive clone, which I think is somewhat ironic because Sunset Overdrive was made by Insomniac, who made the Spider-Man games, which were influenced by the Arkham games, made by Rocksteady. But we've devolved to a very similar game to Sunset Overdrive at this point.
The unfortunate reality of game studios is that you will have studios that churn out a ton of really good games and you really love them and you're like, oh man, they can do no wrong. But the people in those studios cycle out. It's not always going to be the same team making these games as it was. And so it's a drastically different group than it used to be.
Yeah.
And clearly different direction, different plans, and different standards are at play here now.
I think it's definitely important to note that the two, I don't want to say CEOs or whatever position, they were the co-founders of Rocksteady, and they'd been there since it was founded, left last year as Suicide Squad was ramping up and about to release. They left, which is somewhat telling. I mean, they were definitely involved in the process, but I don't know if that is from being upset with the process, with the outcome. But yeah, that's definitely an example of it being what seems to be a completely different team and definitely a different initiative and a different direction that I don't like. And it seems like I'm not the only one, obviously.
Yeah. So nearing the wrap up here,
Yes.
Riley, what do you think this means for live service games? Do you think they're going to go the way of the dodo and just kind of die out, or where should they go, I guess?
Well, I was kind of expecting after the crash of Marvel's Avengers that we wouldn't see anything like it again. And I think we got Suicide Squad because it was likely started around the same time as Avengers. It seems like it started up probably in 2016 around then in pre-production, and we're just finally getting it now, which is, I don't know. It was more of a product of that time, live service games and microtransaction heavy games. But I don't know. This feels like kind of a remnant of the last few years, and I think we're heading in a better direction.
This will likely discourage similar projects in the future.
Yeah,
I think it'll turn more toward what Helldivers 2 is, where it's punchy, simple ideas executed well, focusing on the gameplay, focusing on just making it a good experience. Obviously, there's improvements to be made with Helldivers, with like the servers and all of that, but that seems to be what the big draw is that it's a really unique, fun atmosphere that just is enjoyable because it is focused on executing this small idea really well.
We have 3 back-to-back failing team-based superhero games. We had Avengers, Gotham Knights, and now Suicide Squad. I honestly, surprisingly, I feel like Avengers might have been the best of those 3 games in terms of character selection, in terms of somewhat faithfulness to the material, and it definitely helps that it's just its own universe. But
I mean, yeah, it has like more variety.
Yeah. And I guess I can say that it having been out for a few years now, it sounds like Suicide Squad is going to go a similar direction.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing right now is comparing 3 rotten apples and trying to decide which one is the most edible. It does seem to be more forgivable in its badness than
and definitely at this point, after this whole roadmap is completed, the game is now done.
Yeah, we're kind of looking back with rose-tinted glasses and being like, all right, there were things that were okay about it.
Yes. No, it's still terrible.
Yeah,
Marvel's Avengers from Square Enix is still terrible. I'm hoping, and I'm thinking that we're probably going to head in a direction that is more consumer driven. I think we've had a couple big successes. Helldivers and Baldur's Gate 3 have been very much gamer oriented instead of stockholder oriented, and they're both having a steady flow of content. Helldivers a little more than Baldur's Gate 3 at the moment. but both have been somewhat classic feeling games in that they're fairly simple in terms of their design-ish. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a little more complex, but it is an older feeling game. It's a top-down computer RPG game, the sequel to a game that came out 20 years ago. Nobody was really clamoring for another game, but it came and took the game industry by storm, got Game of the Year and dozens of other awards. And I think that is driving the direction of the game industry. These games and these types of games, I think they're going to start correcting, and we're going to get hopefully better games. I hope. That's where they should go at the very least. Even if they don't, I think that's where they should.
So takeaway for this, make better games, make more good games.
Yes. Dear game developers, please make better games. Also, dear Larian Studios, please release DLC for Baldur's Gate 3. I will play it in a weekend. I don't care. I want it so bad.
So yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Anything else you want the reader or listeners?
Yes.
I forget I'm not writing a newspaper.
Dear readers. Listen to the podcast, of course. Continue to do that. We will have
to catch us on Fridays when we release.
Yes.
This one should be coming out this Friday. So
yes,
that doesn't mean anything to people that are listening to it because, of course, it's this Friday. It's the Friday that I'm listening to.
Yes, you'll hear it at the earliest on Friday. Also, go out and pick up a copy of the Kansas State Collegian. Also, find our content at kstatecollegian.com. You'll find my pretty pictures and Cole's pretty words there. I also officially have like my staff picture on there, so you can see what I look like compared to everybody else now.
Can see who's responsible for this.
Yeah, we're kind of thinking of potentially inviting some more people on and taking some suggestions for content or questions or hot takes to answer. We'll kind of figure that out as we go. This is likely going to evolve quite a bit.
So yeah, I'm Cole, joined by Riley, and we're going to wrap it up there. Thanks y'all for listening.
Thank you very much, y'all.